Don't try to impress anyone. You're brave, we all know that. Be simple. Be direct.
So how do they do it? How do they achieve those colors I've always wanted to achieve myself? Might it be because of their camera? Well, maybe a bit, but I think I got close this time. So let me show you how I did. So we have here a clip shot with the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K with the Blackmagic Design Film Generation 5 color space. So let's start color correcting it. I will use my node structure for this one. To do this, I will open the gallery menu and drag my node structure to an empty node. If you like my node structure, you can always get it from my website. So let's start by transforming our log material. To do this, I will create a node at the very end, which I will call LUT. I will then convert our log material shot on Blackmagic Design Film Generation 5 color space to Rec 709. And that looks great, and now we can see the interpretation of the image we are going to work with. So let's go to the exposure and contrast node. First, I will reduce the overall exposure of the image with the offset. Now I will change the color balance a little bit by changing the offset color values. For red, I will set it to 9.10. For green, I will use 9.31. And for blue, I will use 899. In magenta, I will now take a little bit away of the tint value. I will set the value to 6 and increase the overall contrast of the image by raising it to 1.126. And now I want to make the image a little bit more solid and give it a monochrome style. So I will lower the saturation to 32.8. Next, I will lower the exposure of the sky a little bit by lowering the gain to around 0.97. And at the very end, I will make the image a little bit warmer now by increasing the temperature. Alright, so now let's go over the white balance and saturation. Since we will be doing all the main color manipulations later on, I'm going to lower the saturation value down to 47.6. Let's now go to the curve and color warper. As I said before, we want to make the image more solid, so we will first slightly tone down the cyan and blue colors of the cloths. To do that, let's go to the tab Curves, Hue versus Saturation. To automatically select the range we want, we can use the color selection presets that we see at the bottom of the active window curves, Hue versus Saturation. So now let's click on the blue preset, and we will immediately see on our curve the selected range. To the right and left of the main color, we will see the anchor points that limit our manipulations with color so that we not accidentally affect the other colors. Now let's lower the saturation of our color simply by dropping the curve down and narrowing the range a bit so that we only affect the color we want. To do that, we shift closer to our point that we are working with. Let's take a quick look at the before and after now. So now let's go to the color warper tool. With this, we can manipulate the hue and saturation. I think in this particular example, I want to make the overall yellow hue a little bit more red, and for that, this tool is great. To do that, I just select the point that is in the yellow spectrum and move it towards the red palette. Now you can see that our whole color palette that was previously more yellow becomes more a red hue. You can change the resolution of the grids in either hue versus saturation or chroma luma modes. You can do this by using the controls at the bottom of the color warper palette underneath the grid itself. So now let's go to the separate drop-down menus, and this lets you choose the resolution of control points for hue and saturation, but also for chroma and luma separately, but by default they're linked together. By the way, with color warper you can make very precise manipulations with hue and saturation. So for example, if you want to make our character's clothes in the video more saturated, you can select this point of the video itself and drag it to the color other radius. You can then increase the saturation of the selected color. You can also do it vice versa by dragging the same point to the inner radius, and we will decrease our saturation with that. So if we move the selected point from the straight axis to the left or right, we can change the hue of our image from green to magenta, for example. But to reset the selected point, just right click on it and it will return to the default position. Next, I want to separate the colors a bit. For this, I will select the highlight node, which is already pre-configured as a qualifier and highlighted the bright areas of the image. And this is very convenient because you do not have to do the same thing every time. In the settings HSL qualifier, I have the preset value of blur radius at 60 and clean white to 15. So this will allow you to soften the edges of the selected range and make the color correction a little bit more smooth and accurate. Now let's correct this selected range by choosing the brightest part of the image in the luminous item. And we will change the value of the tint to -15. Now let's add some saturation through the also configured HSV mode. Adding saturation through the color space HSV will allow us to achieve density and more of a filmic color. Now to increase or decrease the saturation, you will need to increase or decrease the green channel values. In my case, I'm going to increase the saturation just a little bit by setting the value to around -0.04. Now let's add some texture to the image, and to do this first, I use the OFX plugin Contrast Pop. I'm going to increase the detail amount to around 0.094, and now let's take a closer look at the changes. Also, now I will decrease the detail size value to around 0.238, and this setting allows you to choose which image structures are affected by the localized contrast adjustment from less to more. I will also increase the softness value to around 0.321, and this lets you soften the transition between the affected and unaffected areas of the image. Now let's see how the different textures appear in the video. If you haven't seen the video about glow, by the way, I recommend you watch it on my YouTube channel, and I will go a little bit more deep into that in that video. Let's change the competition type mode to screen, shine threshold set to 0.422, and let's take a closer look at what parts of the image are affected. Now we raise the gamma and gain a little bit to enhance the effect. And the next texture I want to add is grain. I also have this node pre-made. Let's turn it on and adjust it in more detail. Now let's zoom in on our image so we can see our grain in more detail. The 16mm grain looks very large for this example, so I'll use the 35mm 200T preset with a slight modification. I'll decrease the texture value to around 0.394 and set the grain value to around 0.128. And now let's go to the item advanced controls. Here we are interested in the settings of the shadows, midtones and highlights. I think the film grain is more prominent in the shadow areas of the image and less in the midtones and highlights, so therefore we will respectively increase the value for shadows and decrease for midtones and highlights to get a more authentic image. And then the final touch is to add a vignette. So now we go to the vignette out node and adjust its edges and areas of the effect and decrease the value of the offset wheel. Alright, so that's it, and that's how simple grading an image can be.